You would think that the wisest, wealthiest king in Israelite history would wake up every morning and be glad to be alive. I don't know about you, but I would be a lot happier waking up being the king than waking up being the guy who digs latrines. By the way, they had marble toilets, by the way, we saw too. You would think that the guy who is in charge of it all will wake up and feel like my life has a purpose, like I am blessed, like everything is going well. When I say something, it is done. I have power over others. I have more wealth than people can imagine. And yet the very man who's the wisest king in Israelite history, Solomon, is credited with writing Ecclesiastes, and this wise man who had more than anybody else, who turned away from God himself, realizes at some point and utters the famous phrase, "Everything is meaningless." That's why I say you should never read Ecclesiastes in one setting, because you will get chapter after chapter of how everything is meaningless. When I was in high school, we called people emo who walked around as if the world was falling apart all the time. I would say Solomon was the original emo. He was the original emotional guy around. Everything is meaningless. The sun is shining. It's meaningless. It's raining. It's meaningless. Everything is meaningless. For Solomon, everything is meaningless because you can never have enough. In that section that we read, he starts off with the section talking about how you will never be satisfied with the riches of this world. In chapter 5, verses 10 and 11, Solomon talks about how when your income increases, your bills increase. A rapper once said that phrase in a different way: more money, more problems. Can you tell you how many times I've seen somebody in life who, if I just get a raise, if I just get a little bit more, if I just get a better job, then my life will be fine, and somehow in a couple of years, they need another raise, and they need a better job. How often have we struggled for and hoped for a better source of income? More money. How many times have we hoped and prayed for and struggled that our income would be increased? And yet, when we do, if we do end up with that raise, if we do end up with that better job, we somehow find ourselves buying better cable packages and nicer phones, nicer cars, and bigger houses, and then we end up with even more debt than we were in before we got the raise. Anybody ever been in something like that? We often believe if I just had a little bit more, I would be happy. But there's always something tempting us to spend our money. Most of the cost of any product that is produced is not the product that is produced. It is the advertising that goes behind getting people to buy this product that has been produced. There's people whose entire jobs it is to get you to buy this brand new thing. I know you just got the Samsung Galaxy S7, and this will solve all your problems for life. Until 5 months later when the S8 comes out, and then you might as well just throw away everything because it's like you're the Flintstones. The new thing has come out, and you must get the new. A brand new car. I've only had the privilege of having one brand new car in my life, and it's a minivan. So You all sit there in envy of me, I know. That brand new car you bought 5 years ago smelled like a new car, felt like a new car. You kind of actually wanted to drive some places in it. 5 years later, it might have 100,000 miles on it. There's coffee stains on the floor. There's French fries buried in the seats. If you have kids or grandkids, or like when I was young, there's crayons melted in the carpet you will never get out. And you trade it in for a quarter of what you paid. And within a couple of years, before you've even paid it off, you want a brand new car. For Solomon, everything is meaningless because you can never have enough. There's never an end to our capacity to want things. And if your goal in life is to make money or to have the newest thing, then you will never be satisfied and your life will be meaningless. That doesn't mean it's wrong to make money, and it doesn't mean it's wrong to have new things. But if your purpose for waking up in the morning is in that, then your life is without meaning. That's the first thing Solomon says in that passage. The second thing that Solomon says is that everything is meaningless because you cannot truly rely on others. Two is better than one. That's actually engraved. Ecclesiastes 4:9 is engraved inside my wedding ring. Life is better with others than being alone. God has created mankind for relationship, not just relationships with God, but relationships with each other. That's why God looked upon Adam and said, it's not good that you're alone, and he made a companion, a counterpart in Eve. The Trinity is actually an example of relationship. You have three divine persons of one essence, all working together in relationship with each other. From the very beginning, relationships have been. That doesn't mean it has to be a romantic relationship, but we all need relationships. God has not called any of us to be a hermit who goes out in the desert and only talks to themselves and the lizards running around. God designed us for relationships. Two are better than one. Alone, when we need help, there's nobody to help us when we fall. There's nobody to defend us when we are weak. But even though it's better with others than it is alone, it's very difficult to find people we can truly rely on. And even the people we can rely upon 95% of the time, there's that 5% that we can't. We reach out and sacrifice our times for friends and family. We sacrifice our resources and our energy. And yet sometimes when we need help, they are just too busy. I've had people who were supposed to show up and help me in my life tell me later on they decided to go watch a movie. That made me feel all warm and bubbly inside. That the newest movie was more important than the help that I needed. And we've all gone through this, haven't we? Where we needed somebody to be there, and something, even if it's trivial, for them at that moment seemed more important than the help that we needed. People lie about us. They gossip about us. And generally they're too preoccupied with their own lives and their own selves to be a friend when we need it. Jesus is a great example of this. You know how many of his friends, how many of his disciples were there on the night that he was betrayed and went through the mock trial and was crucified? None. One of his friends actually betrayed him. Yeah, John ended up being there at the end, but John wasn't there for the trial. So that means that 11 of his friends abandoned him entirely on that night, and one of his friends abandoned him for most of it. Even Jesus' closest friends were nowhere to be found when he needed help. The government will let you down. If that's an eye-opener for you, The government will let you down. Sometimes church will let you down. Families can let us down. So if your goal in life, if the purpose of your life has been built around people, around others, those others will eventually abandon us or not be there when we need them. And our whole goal in life has been meaningless. If you find your purpose in people around you, then your life is without meaning. The third thing Solomon says here is that everything is meaningless because everything is out of our control when we die. One day, you will die. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you are famous or if nobody knows your name. We all die. It's one of the few great equalities in life. Fame and reputations are fleeting. Solomon uses the example here of a king who's a pretty powerful king. He's wise, and yet somehow he ends up forgetting what it's like to take advice. But he uses an interesting phrase in that passage of Scripture. He says, there is no end on all the earth to the people who are under him. Which it means, it's a metaphorical way of saying, this king's empire stretched so far that as far as you can see, that is owned by this guy. There's nobody you can find who is not subject to this king, because that's how far his empire goes. And then what happens? A younger king comes along. The old king dies, a younger king takes his place, and then it says nobody rejoiced in the older, but they rejoiced in the younger. What that means is that old king died, everybody forgets about the old king, everybody celebrates the new king. That happens all the time in our lives. We work hard at a job, we get fired, we get replaced, nobody cares about the guy who used to sit in that cubicle. We only talk to the guy who's there now. You work hard and you try to build something and nobody knows what you've done. Once you're gone, things pass. Reputations change all the time. Two people who worked really hard to really build something that would stand forever, Vanderbilt and Rockefeller, used to be synonyms for the American dream, for hard work, that if you have enough ingenuity, if you have enough creativity, if you have enough guts and daring and hard work, you can build something for yourself that will last forever. And now, Vanderbilt and Rockefeller are synonyms for those evil capitalists who used to be around all the time. Isn't it amazing how reputations change? The very people we exalt in one generation are sneered at in the next generation. But once they're dead, they can do nothing about their reputation. Solomon gives another example later on in Ecclesiastes of somebody who builds a house and plows a field only to have somebody else sleep in his bed and eat his food when he's dead. I think that'd be kind of frustrating. And he doesn't say it's somebody else, he says it's a stranger. Somebody you've never met is going to be living off of the hard work that you have done. For us, we work hard, and then whatever amount of wealth we have, the government takes a big chunk out of it when we die, and they spend our wealth though we worked for it. It doesn't matter what country you live in. Somebody else will be spending what you have made. Let's say you build a house. and you've poured your energy into it. This is your dream house. This is what you longed for. And you worked hard and you earned money to make these payments. And you dreamed of this house and you worked with an architect and you got the schematics laid out. You got everything exactly like you wanted. And you built it and you raised your kids in that place and you celebrate in that place. You have Thanksgivings and Christmas. You have family over. You have these beautiful memories that are made. And then you die and somebody knocks down some walls and rebuilds it, and they walk in and go, oh, this is ugly. I can't imagine they picked this carpet. Why in the world did they do this? And all that you poured your love and sweat and energy into, somebody else comes in and goes, this is terrible. Everything is meaningless because it's out of your control when you die. If your goal is to be remembered, if your goal is to build something that is going to last, then your life is meaningless. Now that we're all depressed, we're going to go home. Like I said, don't read Ecclesiastes in one sitting. This is just one part of one chapter. So if everything is meaningless, what's the point of our lives? Why wake up? Why get out of bed and do something? What is the point of even trying if everything is meaningless? Why did God create life if life has no point? The truth is we only have a point in our life when we are focused on Jesus Christ. A lot of people don't understand that everything else that we chase after is like chasing after the wind. You will never find it. You will never get it. You will never understand what it is like to be fulfilled when you are chasing after things that are temporary and change all the time. The only way you will have a life that is fulfilled and with a purpose is when your purpose is Jesus Christ. God's mission in our life is fourfold. Last week we talked about the first part, which is to choose life. The second part of the mission of God in your life, the mission of life for us, is to follow God. At the very end of Ecclesiastes, after all the talk about life being meaningless, Solomon finally understands the point of life, which he gets at in chapter 12, verses 13 and 14. The end of the matter. After I've spent 12 chapters discussing how life is meaningless and all these things that I tried that failed, all the hard work I did that was pointless, I've discovered the truth. At the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. The whole point of your life is to follow God. Now, the word fear here doesn't mean be afraid of. It means a deep reverence for. So your goal in life is to revere God and obey Him. Well, hold on a second. I thought the goal of my life was to have the brand new iPhone. I thought the goal of my life was to have 6,000 friends on Facebook and I only talk to 12. I thought the goal of my life was to get a really big 401k. I thought the goal of my life was to be liked. This is a king who's come to the conclusion that everything is meaningless, that the whole point of living is to revere God and to walk the path of God. You are not made to chase after things on this earth that are temporary. Jesus says it in a different way. In Matthew chapter 6, 19 through 21, He says, "Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." This morning we have to ask ourselves, where are you storing up your treasures this morning? What are you working for? Are you living for and working for temporary things that other people will change and destroy and other people will spend and things that will not last? Not even after you're dead, things that won't last here on this earth while you breathe. Where are you storing up your treasures this morning? How much of your energy do you spend on things that don't matter? Think about your day. Think about your average day. How much of your day is spent on things that don't matter? How much of our time is spent surrounded by family and everybody's looking on their smartphones and nobody bonds? How much do we work and work and work and miss time with our children and family to buy things that rust, that get stolen, and break? And more importantly, how much do we chase after the things of this world, even family, and we forget the only thing that is eternal, which is God? If we are called to love God with all of our hearts, souls, minds, and strength, then that means every facet of our being, our whole identity has to be built around God. When you wake up in the morning, our goal for the day should be to do something for the kingdom of Christ. If you go to bed at night and you have done nothing for the kingdom of God, then you have done nothing that is eternal. Period. Yes, we have responsibilities. Yes, we have to eat. Yes, we have to provide for our families. But there's a big difference between the responsibilities we have in life and the purpose of our life. Every one of us has to eat. But our goal in life is not to eat. Every one of us needs shelter. But our goal should not be shelter. Those are things we have to take care of. But when you're waking up in the morning, if your goal is to eat, you'll never be satisfied because you will always be hungry again. Your 401k will be gone. Your retirement will be spent by somebody else. Wouldn't you rather invest in something that will never die? Wouldn't you rather not have spent 80 years on this earth doing something that will rust and fall apart, when instead you could have spent your life working for the eternal kingdom of Christ, which will never die? Every time you let God use you to bring somebody into relationship with Him, that lasts forever. Every time you intercede for somebody in prayer, that's making an eternal difference. Every time you do what Jesus would do, that's living with an eternal mindset. There's a book called In His Steps. From that book comes the famous phrase, what would Jesus do? It wasn't started in the 60s, it was started in the 1890s. If you wake up every morning and go, what would Jesus do? That's living with an eternal mindset rather than living for the things and thinking about the world in a way that is temporary. We need to remember that we are not called by God to build up a nice retirement package or to have a home or to raise a large family. We were made by God for relationship with God. And we are called by God to love the world. This morning, the world wants you to chase after everything that is temporary. God is calling you to have an eternal mindset. What is the purpose of your life? Why do you wake up in the morning? Solomon had more wealth and more wisdom than any king that had ever been before him. And Scripture says God gave Solomon more wisdom than anyone who would ever live after Solomon. And yet in all of his wisdom, Solomon turned from God and chased after all of these other gods because he kept chasing after all of these women and they served other gods. And at the end of the day, Solomon was judged by God. And everything that he built collapsed after his death. All the wealth and the wisdom of this world only got Solomon temporary things. I want to stand one day in front of God and I want to hear, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." You don't get that by being an acquaintance of God. You don't get that by knowing God exists. Live your life in service to God. What is the whole point of life? To have a relationship with God and to walk in His path. Everything else, everything else, everything else is meaningless.